Hello, good morning. I'm going to get straight into it because I've got quite a lot to say, and I'm going to start with a list, okay? Tavistock. Come on, let me carry on. Tavistock, mermaids, critical race theory, corporate wokeism, the SNP, Two-Spirit, LGBTQI+, the Green Party, the mainstream media, Extinction Rebellion, Net Zero, The Science, Islamist apologists, a cashless society, decolonisation, 15-minute cities, intersectionality. Labour, the Tories, and last and very probably least, the Lib Dems. To borrow the words of Roy Bland, a character in John le Carré's Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, that's England today, man. All you have to do is look out the bloody window. It's a hell of a way to start a talk, isn't it? But do bear with me. I had visions of the auditorium emptying very quickly. Don't go, because what I'm going to try and do in the next, 20, 25 minutes or so is get from that shopping list from hell to the title of this talk, which is, God Help Me, Reasons to be Cheerful. All of those things, the things listed, have one thing in common. They relate in some way, shape, or form to social justice activism. They either embody it or they are infected by it. It's the nature of that activism, actually, here that I'm going to talk about today. Because perversely enough, that's where I hope to find our main reasons to be cheerful. I'd better explain, hadn't I? Social justice, modern social justice as a concept, has no truck with the truth. It's about obfuscation. Why? Because there are activists can make any claim they want to over and over. We've seen some of this lately, okay? One, I'll give you three examples, right? One, Britain is a racist society. So says a recent study published by the Runnymede Trust. In 2021, though, if you remember, the Sewell report said that Britain was most definitely not a racist society. That, obviously, wasn't what some people wanted to hear. So they just commissioned another study, and another, and another. And with a bit of methodological sleight of hand, they eventually arrived at their preferred conclusions. It simply isn't true to say that Britain is a racist society. Anyone who lives here knows it isn't true. More to the point, every economic migrant risking life and limb in a dinghy knows it isn't true. But still we get it. Britain is a racist society. That's number one. Number two, diversity is our strength. This ridiculously simplistic assertion must never be questioned. Yet, in such a complex society, with such a complex and competing set of cultures and demographics, we all know that actually diversity is our challenge. Now, it's not racist or exclusionary to say that. It's just a point of fact. And yet still we have the mantra, diversity is our strength. Number three, the climate emergency. This is a good one. Activists salivate at the prospect of total annihilation, don't they? We're all dead. Excellent. That'll teach the Western capitalists. It's queers for Palestine, turkeys for Christmas logic. And you may not be aware, well, you probably are, actually. Come on, let me speak. You may not be aware that there was a total climate catastrophe that took place in 1982, and then again in the year 2000, and yet again in 2012. That's what we were told anyway. Okay, but don't worry, I know you missed it, but there is a date for the social diary. 2030, that's the next one, okay? Something to look forward to. It's fantasy. It's fantasy. And people are bullied into believing it as truth on pain of racism, selfishness, climate denial, and so on. At least that's a good part of it. But the modern social justice agenda isn't all haranguing, far from it. There's a lot of cajoling involved too. It tugs shamelessly at the heartstrings, seeking to position its target as the good guy, the empath, the thinking they, them. It's an ego-emotional carrot with an isms and phobias stick. That's quite a decent, though I say so myself, it's quite a decent definition of social justice activism. So far, this tactic has proved incredibly successful. Look at the state of the government, the civil service, education, the media. Lately, though, in the wake of the BLM protest, the activist MO has changed slightly, or at least it's diversified. It's taken on a conspicuously theatrical demeanour. I've coined a term for it. I call it narcissistic protest performativity. Narcissistic protest performativity. It's really nice, actually, that I'm seeing heads nodding. Yeah, that fits. That fits. Good, because if you accept that, then you'll accept the rest of what I'm going to say. Here's my definition or set of elements. Is it going to work? Can I get it to move? Can we have the next slide, please? Great. Okay, I think he's got four main elements. Yeah. The first one is theatrical spectacle. It's about putting on a show. Yeah. The second one is central performativity, a central performative element, which is incredibly selfish. This is me performing to save you. Yeah. It's characterized, I think, by a religious fervor and almost by a very distasteful autoerotic energy that you see in these people. It's willfully destructive and nihilistic, often playfully so. And of course, it's privilege masquerading as victimhood and virtue. While there are a good many examples of this tendency from the Green lobby, I'm going to stick with trans radical activists, or as I prefer to call them, anti-female terrorists. Because I think they more properly illustrate my point. And just to be clear then, this is not about cultures, demographics, race, characteristics, sexuality, climate denial. It's not about any of those things. It's about overreach and excess, some of it pathological, in radical activist circles. Because really, in lots of ways, this is what we're up against. Yeah? Over the last few years, we've seen a kind of unravelling in which erstwhile stable coalition of liberal progressives has come apart at the seams. Rod Liddell talked a bit about this in his recent Smith lecture, so I point you there for details, and it's very entertaining. But I'll make a couple of brief observations here. One, the fantasy that trans women are literally women doesn't wash with feminists, real feminists, I mean. Consequently, women who are concerned with women's rights have been ostracized from the ultra-liberal left. Two, and more broadly, the rabid misogyny of trans radical activism manifests itself in such a graphically performative way that reasonable progressives of either sex are, quite rightly, alarmed at its grotesque spectacle. Let's have some context, just very briefly, before I give you some examples of that spectacle. The Tavistock and Mermaids safeguarding scandals brought many underlying concerns to the surface, as we know. At Tavistock, staff were under pressure from powerful lobbies to bypass talking cures and opt for drastic medical measures, puberty blockers for children. At Mermaids, an academic trustee was discovered to be a paedophile apologist, and 14-year-old girls were routinely sent breast binders in the post without the consent or knowledge of their parents. In other areas, other things were coming to light, and more people started to grasp the extent of the problem. Now, activists routinely claim that lesbians can have penises. They say that same-sex attraction is exclusionary. They are, moreover, hell-bent on competing with biological women in every way. A woman without a penis, ran one of the crazier performative means, is like an angel without wings. No. Really, no. On the one hand, it's comically absurd. Okay, I think we know that. But on the other hand, it's deeply disturbing. Because until very recently, another manifestation of this desire to somehow replace women could be found almost everywhere in female sports. At the heart of this worrying tendency is one Geoffrey Marsh. Could I have the next slide, please? An activist who urges confused and troubled teenagers to bypass their parents and contact him directly. When a British Muslim comedian accused Marsh of grooming, the mob went for her. Her car was vandalized. Her own children were threatened. She ended up publicly begging her tormentors to leave her children alone. Such are the consequences of speaking out to radical activism, and the consequences are particularly harsh for women. Marsh is constantly making demands, ostensibly therefore respect, but really they're about dominance, and I'd point you to his YouTube channel to just see lots and lots of examples. His notoriety rests on what he doesn't say and what he doesn't do, on his ability, in other words, to perform a kind of implied intimidation. It doesn't matter that Marsh is in the US, by the way. He's not here. He's on the West Coast. His reach, which is considerable, is through social media. He really might as well be next door. Here at home, we have a charming group called Pissed Off Trannies. Can I have the next slide, please? Their protest, they protested outside the EHRC offices, and it involved 60 bottles of urine. One activist poured urine all over himself and urinated in the streets. Importantly, he did all this while dressed like the embodiment of your worst nightmare. Now, it's a kind of street theatre, sure, but it's something else as well. It offers, I think, a glimpse of the real self. It's a physical illustration of malignant intent and a rotten core of ideas. It's the portrait of Dorian Gray exposed to the cold light of day. Now, it's not nice to look at this stuff, but actually we've got to. We've got to be aware of it. We've got to understand it. We've got to engage. When they go out of their way to reveal themselves for what they are, it's our duty to take note. When they communicate contempt through very carefully constructed systems of signs and signifiers, then we must read that visual language. And we'll get plenty of practice because they reinforce their message time and time again. Can I have the next slide, please? I don't know whether you can see that actually, but it's an activist with a gun. And the next slide, please. And finally, the next slide, please. People who want acceptance don't tend to wear balaclavas. People who are interested in inclusion don't usually make threats with guns. People who care about society don't mess around with kids. Kelly J. Keane, thank you. I'm not showing you many reasons to be cheerful yet, am I? But we'll come to the point. Kelly J. Keane, that heroic adult human female, refuses to be intimidated by this. By standing up and talking back, she makes a real and positive impact. Her grassroots movement will not be silenced, even when confronted with alarmingly unhinged behavior. Now, this is really interesting because the activists used to practice a kind of symbolic terrorism, typically visited on remoter figures like J.K. Rowling. Now it's actual terrorism, by which I mean mob intimidation and physical violence. Last month, after her event in New Zealand, Keane said she thought the mob might kill her. At one point, she was attacked by a soup-throwing activist. It was a classic example of narcissistic protest performativity. After slipping away, unpunished, the perpetrator basked in 15 minutes of social media fame and claimed as his due the reward of notoriety, which, along with hero status in the trans community, is what this kind of protest is really all about. It's a testament to Kelly J. Keane that the enduring image of that event is this. Can we have the next slide? It's an incredible image. To my mind, it symbolizes the bravery of all women standing up to this kind of intimidation. And it stands in stark contrast to that bundle of silliness that is Dylan Mulvaney. Can we have the next slide, please? That's the face of Bud Light. That's the face of Nike sports bras. I call it woman face, a ludicrous, mocking, gaslighting caricature, viscerally anti-female, narcissistic protest performativity, once again in a pure form. Thank you. I can see, I don't have to make it up now. Right. These representations, these visual images and social media video clips are important. There are reasons to be cheerful because they are helping to turn the tide. No, really, images are important. For example, the idea of male rapists in female prisons is appalling as an idea, but its graphic illustration is something else. Images of this man, can I have the next slide, please? Probably did more to damage Nicola Sturgeon's reputation than any other single thing. It's useful to think of identity politics as layered like an onion. At the center, you have a core of activism and ideology. The next layers are the natural advocates and the captured institutions. Then there's an outer layer. It's made up of people who go along with the latest thing. You know them. There, you'll work with them. They'll be your friends and relations, neighbors and acquaintances. They're not ideologically motivated, and generally, they're very decent people. But theirs is a position that is essentially a lazy one. It goes something like this. Identity politics must be safe because it's taught in schools. It must be rigorous because it's on the BBC. It must be healthy because it's the beating heart of the NHS. Okay, here's the good news. Even lazy people sometimes pull their socks up. They see this stuff, the activism, and they balk. They realize that once revered institutions are no longer the grown-ups in the room. These people don't want to be associated with narcissism, psychopathy, willful deceit, bad faith, sneering condescension, and sex obsession. They're fed up with it. And they're embarrassed by it. They're the outer layer of the onion, and they're beginning to peel off. You can see it in some of the consequences that I'm going to just illustrate to you now, actually. So here are some more reasons to be cheerful. Can I have the next slide, please? In academia, peer-reviewed work routinely referring to mainstream party politics as far right. Translated, that means ordinary people aren't buying into it like they used to do, so let's smear them in the time-honored tradition and talk in terms of a backlash. Now, I wouldn't take a publication like that too seriously, on its own anyway. For academics, everything just outside of the gulag is far right. But it's not on its own. There are reliable empirical surveys, and I'll give you an example. Here's one from July 2022. 7,000 people polled by the Sex Matters group. 97% of them said that single-sex spaces were important. That's a meaningful challenge to the activist and establishment narrative. Mainstream entertainment. Just this week, The Telegraph reported that J.K. Rowling had been uncancelled. She's personally involved in a new Harry Potter series for Warner Brothers. That's some indication, at least, of a turning in popular opinion. And there's more. Politics. Keir Starmer, still confused about womanhood. His ratings beyond the chattering class bubble are in the toilet as a result. Rishi Sunak, by contrast, is happy to admit that 100% of women don't have penises. He's doing all right, relatively speaking. And finally, advertising. Look at the fate of Bud Light. Yeah? You opt for narcissistic protest performativity, you take a massive hit where it hurts in revenue. Just to conclude, at the end of the day, most people don't like toxic ideologies, but they just don't know they don't like them. Well, that's not actually strictly true. As I've argued, a good number of relatively progressive people are opting out. I've used trans activism, and let me just be clear again, I'm talking about the activists. I'm not just talking about ordinary trans people who just want to go about their everyday lives. I'm talking about activism. And I've used them as an example, and I've also mentioned the Green Lobby. The theatricality of their protests, defacing works of art, sabotaging sports events, throwing paint around, is just plain annoying. It's childish tantrum on display. It's brats playing up at a friend's dinner party. Now, okay, I admit it. These are very, very small changes, and it's not the institutions, it's not the media, and unfortunately, it's not education. But I am onto something. There is a sense of fatigue among the I follow the latest thing people. The outer layer of that identitarian onion is peeling off. And here's something else. I spend a lot of time with young people, right? And I'm pleased to report that many of them are sick to the back teeth of this activism. It's passé, it's pointless, it's obvious, it's mainstream. It's something for them to rebel against. Let's hope there are enough of these youthful dissidents to carry their revolt into the future, because they have a strong foundation on which to build. Now, that brings me to the end of my talk, and I'm going to finish it with another list. I started with one, so I'm going to end with one. Let women speak. NCF locals, LGB Alliance, homeschooling, the SDP, reform and reclaim, adult human female, adult human male, the University of Buckingham, History Reclaimed, the IEA, Sex Matters, the Equiano Project, Traditional Conservatism, the Academy of Ideas, GB News, Don't Divide Us, Migration Watch, and Academics for Academic Freedom. And lastly, and probably foremost in terms of the culture war, Here, Now and Tomorrow, the New Culture Forum. Thank you.
Lady here, Joe, I know from Birmingham, and a gentleman behind. Yeah.
I'm delighted that, and why you've cheered me up, that a man is standing there, and I know that you, Peter, have also very often stood with women against this trans onslaught that we're seeing. Yeah. So thank you all for that. And there are other men, countless men, but women have stood in the last couple of years, really, have been feeling very isolated because of this. So my question is, how do we tackle this moving forward? We need to concentrate on getting women collectively, rather than in small groups, fighting back against this. I'm a mother of 4 and a grandmother of 7, and I fear for my grandchildren's future because this ideology is going into academia. That's where it's coming from. It's the kids on the streets that are attacking Kelly Jean and Maria McLaughlin and people like that. How do we get academia to see that they're a breeding ground for this trans, dangerous ideology?
Okay.
Congratulations, you've just asked me the hardest question of the day. How do we get academia to push back against trans ideology? The honest answer to that is I don't know. In terms of grassroots movements, in terms of media, I've just given some examples. I could have given a lot more examples there of people pushing back. They are in silos, and they are, it is a very few women. But I suppose the essence of my talk today is that is going to grow and grow, and it's going to grow in relation to the greater insanity of the activists. Now, the institutions and higher education in particular is completely captured by activists. So I don't think that the universities aren't going to grind to a halt and say, "Oh my God, we were wrong. Let's completely change. Let's completely change our policies." I think what's going to happen is that actually, and it's beginning to happen now, people like your granddaughter, people like that, they're actually going to stop going to university to do arts, humanities, and social sciences because there really won't be any point, And I think it's going to get to that situation where people say, actually, or faculties and institutions say, actually, well, we need to do something because we're not getting any revenue. As Matthew pointed out before, very, very, correctly, many institutions rely on Chinese students at the moment. And now that is a very volatile market. If that goes, then a lot of institutions are in a huge amount of problems. So I think it will be brute finance that makes them listen, but they will listen kicking and screaming, and it will be a long time into the future. I know that's not the answer you want, but I really can't think of a better one at the moment.
Just the one gentleman there. You just want, because we're going to have to wrap it. Thank you.
Hello, Philip. Thank you very much for that. My understanding is that you work in the university sector. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Considering the current environment, how on earth do you still have a job? How do you survive day to day? You must have a strategy. Thank you.
I think the environment's changing. And I think despite appearances to the contrary, there is a vestige, a very tiny vestige left of older academics who are still in positions of power, who cling on to something of academic integrity and freedom of speech. There is something there quite clearly because I function and to a certain extent thrive in that environment. What worries me is when that generation of people go, who are essentially my age and older, a new generation of essentially millennials and Generation Zs who have just been drenched in identity politics will be very different. By that time, I'll be retiring, so it won't be terrible for me. But the point is, it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I genuinely think it will be a different environment eventually, but it might be a better environment. But let me just say that what I've said here, in a sane world, there's nothing that I could be pulled up for. I'm literally saying that extreme radical activism that is fueled by hatred towards a particular demographic and denies biological reality. I'm just saying that's wrong. I'm not demonizing a group of people. I'm not talking about sexuality. I'm not talking about any of those things. I'm talking about people who are captured by poisonous ideologies. And that's all I'm saying.
They don't care that you're right.
No.
This is the problem. They don't care.
They don't, but there are still a few people in positions of power who do care. And I suppose that's something we've got to cling to.
Thank you very, very much, Philip, for a wonderful speech. Thank you. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.